Back here at 7:07, we got there in the end, didn't we? Level 4, and as of midnight tomorrow night, a different sort of New Zealand for at least 4 weeks. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is with us. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Do we or have we confirmed community spread 100% yet?
Yes, and in small numbers, but yes. We've had 2 cases, Mike, where we haven't been able to trace to international travel directly for the individuals or international travel contacts within those
Right, so it was those
circle.
2 people you're calling community spread now?
Yes,
Okay.
That is correct. We have had some wider cases where people have had COVID who haven't themselves travelled, but where we have been able to identify the source. In these cases, we can't identify the source.
Some of the modelling I think you've seen as well. By Thursday, the prediction is 229 cases, Sunday 607, by next Thursday 2,325. Are those the sort of numbers that tipped you over the edge?
Well, there was simply that statement of fact that if we have community transmission, you can keep expecting the numbers to double. The assumption that's being made overseas is a transmission rate, and there has been some debate over whether it's for every 1 person, 3 people infected, or 4. So you can see how it doesn't take much for those numbers to grow quite quickly. If an individual is not aware, if they've got mild symptoms and they're not self-isolating, how those things can escalate quickly.
Have you been disappointed in the lack of response around social distancing, public events, panic shopping, etc.?
Panic shopping has been particularly problematic, and it just doesn't seem to matter how many times we say to people that we consider supermarkets essential services. They've guaranteed they will remain open, and we're working to support them on that. But it's human nature, and we have to build in human nature to our thinking on how we stop the spread of COVID as well. And so that's why giving those really clear instructions and removing any risk that people take risks. But now our success relies on everyone. You know, we can keep this as short as possible if everyone complies. We risk it lingering if
Yeah, but the
people
problem
don't.
is we're surrounded by idiots, clearly.
Well, the way that we can mitigate against, human nature is the way that I would describe it, Mike, is just making this as simple and as clear-cut as possible.
Do you have regrets around the airport? There's a bloke who arrived in the country yesterday from Shanghai via Tokyo, and he goes to be handed a form and a 5-second questionnaire and then be told to self-isolate to wander into the country. It would appear, with the benefit of hindsight, not just here, but it's happened in places like Australia as well, that has been a catastrophic mistake.
And you mean just not having everyone quarantine at the airport?
Exactly, trusting people to self-isolate when really human nature, they were never going to.
And of course, as you can imagine in this, we know that overseas has been a significant risk. A vast majority of our cases have been New Zealanders returning home who are carrying COVID. Now, one of the things that we thought about in great detail is that exactly that. Could we put everyone in at whangaparo? Could we have everyone in hotels? The simple issue, Mike, I think we don't realise how many New Zealanders travel abroad. The scale was enormous of New Zealanders who have come home.
So what China's doing, you could not have done. So China are taking you off the plane, taking your temperature, and if you're staying, you're in their isolation, nobody else's. And we could not physically have done that.
The latter part, the scale of that just would have been enormous. And keeping in mind, you also don't want to have a Diamond Princess situation where lax food preparation caused that entire quarantine ship for it to just run through like wildfire. But it's the scale. That isn't stopping us from now, of course, looking at, now that we have smaller numbers, what initiatives we can do to really lock down that border risk. And so that's something we're working very diligently on as we speak.
Good. I'll talk to Grant more about this later on. The regulatory issues around banks giving people holidays on mortgages and stuff, has that been ticked off, signed off yet or not?
He spoke with banks yesterday, and it was more at that level of, in principle, what is it that we need to collectively achieve for customers and New Zealanders. The last thing anyone wants is someone who's lost their job, has no ability to go into new work, and has a mortgage and loses their home over the next 4 weeks. So there's broad agreement on what we need to achieve, and now banks are working through all of that.
When you say 4 weeks, Scott Morrison said in the House yesterday in Australia 6 months. Are you underselling 4 weeks?
Oh, no. So what he's talking about is how long we believe.
No, not a lockdown, but in other words, 4 weeks, set us up for 4, then it's another 4, then it's another 4 before you know it.
No, so he's talking about just life with COVID. I'm talking about lockdown. And so we've gone, you'll notice that some countries Spain went to and then extended. So what I didn't want to do is give a number that was we knew from the outset would highly unlikely, just wasn't going to be sufficient because of the cycle of transmission. What we'll see more than likely over this next 2 weeks is our numbers continue to rise, and then what we need to see is our numbers then start coming away, and that will really give us a guide as to whether we've got it back under control.
What number do you need to see to end 4 weeks and not make it 8?
So it'll actually come down to what we're seeing with who has it and where they have it. We can get down into that level of detail with the numbers that we have. That I'm hoping will show that we will be able to remove any suggestion of community transmission in different areas. So even if not all of New Zealand is in that space, we may have regions that will be, and we'll be able to lift restrictions in different regions. But, of course, I remain hopeful that'll be the case for all of New Zealand. But again, intelligence around those individual cases will tell us what's going on with the spread.
The phone issues yesterday, are we testing facilities that we might worry about, or will things work?
So we have been checking in with essential services, even capacity for broadband and so on. Lots of assurances that everything is as it should be and will be able to cope with the additional demand given the number of people that will be working from home and the number of students eventually that might be working on online learning. We are looking, though, at ways to ease capacity. Are there things that we can do using broadcasting to help support online learning where students don't have access to online learning, or to try and reduce down some of the demands on the network? So those
I'm good for several subjects. You just call me anytime. I'm happy to give a lecture.
What would you like to start on?
No, anything.
Hygiene would be great.
Government policy. I might not be on air very
every
long.
morning, Mike. Every morning.
Details on expanded packages around the work, the things that Grant announced yesterday, all businesses. When do the specifics get delivered?
And so actually the key message I want everyone to know straight off the bat is wage subsidies are now available uncapped, so it doesn't matter now how many employees you have. We're recognising what is happening now affects everyone. You can't build contingency around a 4-week lockdown in the same way that our previous situation. So everyone, it is now available for. I really encourage businesses to use that. There will be additional measures that Grant Robertson's now working on. I expect some around bank lending in particular. We've got an Aussie template already. I expect over the next 24 hours.
Will hairdressers be essential businesses?
No.
What about bottle stores?
No. What we're working on, though, is essentially nice and simple description for you, Mike. If it's something that is supplied to a supermarket, we're keeping supermarkets open. In smaller communities, we're making sure there is a food store of some description. What they are supplied with will be able to keep going.
So that's a pretty serious lockdown. The reason I ask those questions, they're not facetious, is that in Australia, for example, a hairdresser is an essential business and a bottle store is an essential business, but not so here.
Yeah, no, Mike, think about the basic principles. We've got to reduce down as much unnecessary contact as possible. Supermarkets, we can make sure that that we've got measures in place where people are keeping distance, where we've got appropriate PPE being used by staff. Hairdressers, for instance, that's close physical contact, sure. And so we've gone all the way to try and make this as short as possible. I think overseas you'll see other countries who just keep escalating.
How stringent are you going to be on making sure people who don't have work do have work in the areas where there is work to have, seasonal work, for example? Yeah,
and so at the moment, with an epidemic notice, essentially what we'll see is just those who are on work visas who are currently here just able to roll over legally. So that's an important part of what's happening now. But you make a good point. Obviously, we've relied on seasonal workers in a lot of our horticultural industry. We're also going to have a lot of people out of work. Before we went into the lockdown, we'd worked up redeployment packages, and had set up a fund to assist with that. So we already were connecting people in, for instance, who had lost work in hospitality and other areas into kiwi fruit. We were doing the same in Tairāwhiti around forestry. So that work will continue when we're in a position where people are moving back into workforce, although fruit picking continues. It's part of our supply network for essential services.
Indeed, but we need lots more people doing it, though. That's the problem.
Yes, we do. Actually, I was quite satisfied with the conversations we were having with Horticultural New Zealand to support them with that, and those will keep going with that.